Hello everyone, today we talk about pros and cons of respectively hyperspecialization and a generalistic view of history. Um, this is a topic I introduced very often to mostly criticize chiefly the first position. That may sound kind of contrasting, kind of jarring, but with a broader intent of a channel or just, of things I told you I do in my life. That is to say, aren't you specializing in something? Don't you do it for the sake of acquiring that comment? Yeah, I do, yes. But at the same time, it's exactly for that reason that I, having seen the thing from the within, comparing with also with other people, can be colleagues, professors, mostly professors, telling the truth, and or however other people that are considered to be particularly competent, because it's also a matter of authority. We'll speak that, how it is recognized. What is a competent person? Who decides that? What is the criterion to determine that? So that I came to the point of course, criticizing polemically even with the idea that the academy in general is heading towards this increasing hyper specialization. I'm fine with specialization per se, right? I just have doubts that becomes the univocal mean. It's gonna lose probably the most important part of research, because you can even be very competent in your own field, but if you can't contextualize the the achievements, the conclusions of your own research in that specific field in the broader one, which is not so difficult at the end, but lacking the comparison with other channels, let's say with other researches proper, can lead you astray sometimes, even when comparing with topics that are actually very close to yours. We've often made examples about that. Then there is the generalized and the generalistic approach, that is instead what I think most people, of course, come close to, especially if they are amateurs, right? And to history in general, and that can in fact be dangerous because of the lack, instead of, and of course, obviously, of a specific competence, of a path, of specialization, of research, of years and years of work. And that can't be objectively acquired but through specialization, right? So it's obvious that both things have their pros and cons, but at the same time, you can't compensate the negative aspects by essentially being both. And we are all both at one point. It's obvious that we all start from a generalistic position, and then we increasingly specializing. We understand better through that specialization, of course, also the surroundings by a certain margin. But it turns out that researching and history and science in general is difficult, right? It's complex, it's complicated, and the reason why we do this in the first place at every level of learning, of teaching, whatever, is objectively to make sense of reality. That is, there is not a let's say a properly rational path that you can't positivistically follow to acquire just a properly objective understanding of reality. It's obvious that there is always going to be some margin for improvement. That is also, in fact, what coming back, the problem of specialization. Sometimes we lack, because it's exactly when you ignore certain other positions, certain other fields, whatever, that you don't even think that what you have a lot to say about, because you have worked so hard on it, may have a broader, importance, can be seen from a different perspective, because you simply don't know that. It's normal. Neurologically speaking, it works like that, right? And therefore, I think I consider myself like part of both at this point, because at this point of my research, as at the end, I have acquired a certain level of, maybe not much in depth of specialization, I believe, but let's say, considering that I also made a bit of historiographical critique, and I had to write essentially things that had been just tangentially touched by historiography, sometimes even covered but not taken into consideration per se, right? I had, I must say, I was struck, right, not just through this research, but also something made in the past, of how scarce the overall attention towards those specific topics I had gotten interested in and worked on was, right? So I don't know where to start from, because obviously the specialization perspective is a bit more complex in a sense, but it does touch the generalistic side of the story as well. Why? Well, because as we often said, there is also a market of science, let's say, of knowledge, of information, and we are all a bit hungry for that raw material, we could say. It's never raw, and in fact, the best thing would be for us to be raw, to eventually work on it, to literally get to the point ourselves. But when we speak of scholarly work, we naturally look at a range, and more, I'd say, the different layers of depth. I can say of competence even, because there you often realize not just, scholars work in academy and they make their own scientific work there, but some of them legitimately and also helpfully for society, right? For disclosing, for broader information. Those are books that are mostly read in absolute terms, because they are easier in a sense, or let's say they're designed more specifically to be accessible by a large amount of people, and that naturally are designed to be so. And that's where there is some perplexity sometimes, and also a bit of disorientation that, let's say, in fact comes from the journalistic point of view, sometimes doesn't understand, right? This has an impact on the discourse on authority, because let's be honest, when we look at this information, as we often said, we tendentially want quality, right? Especially if we come from a background that we're not interested to collect lot of information. We just want the good one. That means, I buy that book or two, and I know that those are the point of reference I need for a broader, for bragging about that with friends, with I don't know. There is a lot of that. Surely, if you go around the internet, social media, people tend to compete on these topics, especially when it comes to military history. We all know that as psychopathic males, we tend to... No, of course, it has nothing to do with that, naturally. Actually, people who get interested in military history are... First of all, there are a lot of women, of course, and that is fantastic. But secondly, there is a much more rational and kind of anti-dogmatic approach around those. Probably, I would go as far as saying military history in general, than any other social, humanistic branch, I would say, right? Because warfare cannot go in parallel with bollocks, and that is obvious in reality, as much as, for understanding the mechanism of what happens in that reality that cannot be equivocated so easily. But let's say that I think it happened to all of us to find a person. I found this thing written in that specific book, so go check yourself, because it's like that. Well, that is the standard position of course, the person who just depends on that specific book, on that specific information, and doesn't dare, I would say, to look beyond it and to make a better point, if anything, for himself, because everybody understands at that point that information is passively received, and you're attributing authority to that source, for that scholarly source at the end of the day, so it's an historiographical one, just because you decided to attribute it yourself. Those who work behind stage naturally know what lays behind that, and that's why I also always tell you to be wary of historiography in general. It's not a snobbish kind of elitistic, or I don't know even how to say in English. I mean, somebody was never content with, with anything. But objectively, yes. I mean, I think it's more useful sometimes to understand the subtleties than the broader issue, because the broader issue, even historically speaking, can be understood only when you acquire a certain amount of information. And I think, an average-minded person, after having read 3 or 4 books about a certain topic, books, monographies from the most competent scholars out there, can develop autonomously a concrete idea of what the problem is out there. It does take time. Doesn't start like that. Doesn't mean that the person becomes competent by just doing it. Especially, in fact, if it stops to the surface of what the scholarly text is, and this doesn't illustrate specifically the connection with the evidence, with sources, and what the work has been behind that. Naturally, scholarly work is full of mistakes, in a sense. There are mostly mistakes of perspectives, and they're not better than, let's say, banal mistakes like, you mistake one date, one name, whatever. That is not even so important. You're not even meant to be judged maybe in certain miscalculations, because you understand there is sometimes so much data out there that everybody can't commit a mistake like that, unless maybe a date there doesn't entail a broader chronological issue with which you have based the argumentation, but it doesn't happen at that point. But I'm referring especially to the that going beyond to the scientific evidence that is sometimes very well outlined by certain scholars. That is to say, I made an example. I must say, making this video is a bit because I'm a bit lazy. I would go gladly back on von Clausewitz, but I see that also these videos score more than the von Clausewitz series that today I've sadly looked at, the new YouTube stats charts, and all the least watched videos are all from the von Krieger series, but I will come back on that for sure. It's just that I find, also there are other reasons why now I lose a bit of time like this, but I've seen that there is some interest towards these topics at the end of the day, so it can be useful in part, and it surely serves the broader purpose of this channel. And even I never lack the opportunity to insert a bit of Clausewitz in notice in this content as well. But what I was saying is that I recently bought a book that fundamentally is about, namely, at least in the same topic of my research. Came out last autumn. I didn't know, but it was a disclosuring book. So I'm at the close. In 1 month I shall be done with everything. So it would have, and this was from the top guy I have. Let's say I should, ideally depend. I mean, not depend, but let's say it's the guy in my country has written the most about this stuff, and it's a great work. But now I will explain you why. What are the tricks there? So this is first of all a disclosuring book, like tons and most of the stuff he's written, because at the end of the day, scholars write mostly articles. I mean, quantitatively speak. I mean, in terms of numbers, not surely of volume of text, but every once in a while, maybe a very serious monography that makes school a little bit. And then this disclosuring books, at least in this case, they are commercialized eventually, and are, however, coming from a very good source, a very smart person who spent a lifetime studying certain topics. But even from here, where does it, hyper specialization lay here? Because choosing the topic to discuss is also crucial, right? There are, when it goes to disclosuring, naturally people tend also to be more let's say, more open to the variety of topics they discuss. It's like me on Schwerpunkt. I hope you understand that what I do here can be objective. I mean, looking at YouTube's average, yes, there's nobody who takes the time to explain certain things, sometimes cover certain topics to make all these also framing methodological, let's say, method, even philosophy, history, based topics and so on, videos. But this is mostly a general content. That is to say, most of the information I get from here, it's either, sometimes we look straight at the sources. That is a good thing, and then that is kind of the most original and also useful kind of content, I would say. Then, of course, I look at a historiography, I read it, I comment it, I come up with other ideas, I reformulate certain. I even disagree most, sometimes at least, and that is the fascinating aspect. How much I have prepared on Schwerpunkt to base my videos on, that I said, what the hell did this person write? It's not like that, right? And that is mostly a matter of perspective, right? Here I don't give you the full example what an analysis should be. Maybe in some battle videos, given that we look at the sources, we make a bit of military logical exercises to say, you just have the sources. That's literally all we have. Let's try to analyze what this thing is. It's not even the best there, because even an ancient battle that has just like 2 or 3 sources that talk about the same thing cannot just be read simply by looking at the battle passage and not considering lots of other stuff, right? That's why also more general understanding should be obvious. Let's say, if you're an expert in ancient warfare, let's say you're a historian, but you're not an archaeologist, which, well, maybe for ancient history it tend to be much closer, of course, in terms scholarly speaking, but there is a difference. Like, not everything that concerns combat and combat logic, I mean, in general, also military history, necessarily fits an average ancient historian education, right? This can go on so many different levels. I mean, the mistakes that even experts made sometimes by mistakes of translation, right? When Connolly used the Loeb translator and basically transformed the Libo-Phoenician Longakai into Macedonian pikes, well, and everybody began to follow the guy. So you have all these paintings, pictures on the internet with the Carthaginian army like a Macedonian phalanx. Well, and there are people who believe that, right? And the reason why they do is that because, of course, they don't even know that this thing happened, but they don't even have dared, as before, to go look in the source and say, what is the source saying? And what do you think, what does make you think that things are like the way you decided to imagine, to fantasize on, right? We will come across again this kind of examples because they are so banal. The thing is that knowledge at the end of the day it's not easy, but it's relatively simple. That is not that our mind can process who knows which kind of data amount of information. We mostly have a dramatic synthesis capability that only our brain can do, as a calculator we could say, and that should solicit you to have doubts and to approach things critically, information critically, wherever it comes from, at every moment, because it's exactly what historians do with sources, right? Those guys would quote the historian, would sell their own matter to know how to quote the source most of the time. And quoting the source, however, doesn't mean that the source, even, first of all, you have to understand what it says. If anything, even linguistically, like in Conley's case, and that's it. That is, what the hell does that, what a long K is. If you don't know, you should check it out. But not knowing that means also not having a practice with, first, the same sources. I mean, the same ancient literature, with the same ancient Greek, with the same military history at broader levels. That's what the general comes more than handy. It becomes necessary, right? And that's why this notionistic attitude that very often stems from kind of classicistic humanistic prejudices, right? We should always fuse humanistic and scientific topics together, because we need that. We need an inquiring mind that goes without prejudice in everything we do, right? So I was telling you about this book, and I told you about the thing that came out last autumn, because as you understand, if I have to hand this work finally after 3 years, more than 3 years at this point because of COVID, to be reviewed, of course I have to have an updated bibliography, right? A recently updated bibliography. So I said, wow, I wrote this thesis that I kind of take pride of, because it's, as I was saying before, it's beyond topics that have been discussed normally, at least, as a focus, as a structure, as an aim. It's something very different from what has ever been done before. But it does talk about tactics, right? It does talk about combat, talks about battles, and more, but fundamentally revolves around that. Well, the book is on battles. So the first thing I said, oh no, right? So I ordered this thing, it arrived, and I read it already and integrated a bunch of things that were very interesting. The book was, I liked it, right? But first of all, you start the introduction, and the introduction already makes the poor von Clausewitz, arrested in his grave. Why? Well, first of all, because this is a book about battles that explicitly starts with saying, we can't basically say everything about battles except how they were actually fought, right? And from my own perspective in this case, it was cool, because that's exactly instead what I base my work on. So I know that this, may actually even just create a couture, integrate some information I need, but not touch in my own sphere. That is, now I will sum up the thing by saying that the author, of course, had a point there. He was saying that battles are not important just because how they were fought. Of that we already know. Think about new military history, how we generally speaking approach warfare at this point. But in fact, it's a bit too generic. It goes far straight from the concept of differentiating between a military history and an art of war, properly meant. A history of the art of war, And this, okay, I said, well, all right. And the reason being also reading something astonishing, like even phrases like, we can't even say when battles begin and they end, right? So all the combat units things von Clausewitz told about, it doesn't exist, right? Even I can't understand, if you talk about conflict, you can't properly say when it began and when it ended, right? And of course, even a war there is to be studied in function of that conflict. So you must do a bit of prehistory of that. You can't study just the war. But when it goes to battle, and you're focused on tactics, and you can't objectively say in a serious book that you don't know when a battle begins and a battle ends. Not because we are there with the chronometer to say, okay, start it now, count where it stops, but because it's pretty obvious that that it's irrelevant to even care, and that more or less, that these battles, all the ones I analyzed, lasted some hour, and you have to stress it because it gives you a broader temporal dimension of how these things were engaged. And empirically speaking, yes, you do know when a battle began and battle ended, because otherwise, how even can a commander just start, fighting one, right? So these are already those statements that make you understand that you can have the greatest experts out there about certain topics. This person, I won't say what his expert, but he's an important medievalist and so on, doesn't have a military historical background, properly meant. An education, the phone critic doesn't exist. Strategic culture, what is that? I don't know. And so make this book that is at disclosure level very cool. Then, of course, here and there he had to talk about combat, because otherwise what do you talk about? So, for a battle, there were interesting, even a psychological history approach that I don't completely agree. What dissatisfied me the most? That it was, it's full of food for thought there, but it doesn't expand on it. because this is what disclosures do, and I would do the same, right? And I do the same sometimes in Schwerpunkt. I throw right the ball, and I don't really go take it back. I mean, I don't take it to the end of the line to explain all what I meant, because first of all, I made almost 1,000 videos, so in theory there is some reference here and there when I explain factually that thing, and I don't repeat. I try not to repeat myself, but I also try to remind when to give a minimal explanation when I say something, and why at least, or why at least I presume that all what I've done there, where I explained that, I know how I've explained that, right? So the other person may not know, so maybe it may not be that polite, but at least if you're interested in what I do, you know that these videos are a cascade of information, thoughts, and so on that, of course, you can't even retain altogether. I presume it's very easy to equivocate even what I say, right? To distort it in a sense. Everybody, I get it from the comments. I mean, each one of you understands one thing. It's perfectly normal. We all have different ideas. We all have different understanding, and that's the same thing, right? It's like when you listen to a song. It's never the same. You always discover new things every time you listen to it. In a sense, it depends on the day, on the all the contingencies, the mood, what your memories. It's meant to be like that. So at that point, it's the more you say, the more you give, that makes the difference. But at the same time, this shall have a pattern. For example, this book was very well informed, right? It referenced everything. It's how actually a history book should be written. That is, some disclosure in content usually do not do. Some disclosure in content, especially the very commercial stuff that may even look cool and even cost enough. That stuff you find in museum shops. That some are pretty cool. Others, they're not so referenced. They mostly say, look, it was like that, and then source. Like, where do you get the stuff from? Yes, there's maybe a general bibliography at the end, but, where did you articulate the whole thing? Here it was like how also I was actually influenced by this guy, the way I wrote my work back in the day, because it's a person that I've been reading for years now, given that we have similar topics. I even contacted him once, didn't quite reciprocate, but I also understand him because he had other things to do, and it's a list of thoroughly, referenced information, right? I was reading, for example, a much more intellectually provoking author that I won't say who is relative to my research, because but for example, is also a far more intelligent person, a person who can express himself dramatically well, dramatically, elegantly, and formal, with great ideas, great capacity of expression, but doesn't reference much his sources. Sometimes I read things and I say, well, wait a second, but where is this? Where is the evidence for this? Yes, there are some notes here and there, but just a couple in a page, and that's not enough. I go back looking at those studies sometimes to check the information, and those studies do not even talk about that. So I can't help but wonder whether this person invented the thing or not, right? So I prefer definitely the former guy, even though it's kind of more boring to read, because it sounds more like a list overall and not as a speech, as a discourse altogether. Well, beautiful book. We're talking about almost 300 pages. A dance of these references. It can be in the hundreds, and even in the thousands, I suspect, considering the volume. Also, I skipped through pages because actually was like I've seen everything it was written in there, but let's say I was interested in that either because of the introductions of the various chapters, because they could give some theoretical background. I was disappointed because there was no intention there to make something more a theoretical synthesis of some new conclusion. No, it was just an exposing those data. And that was easy. Looking at the dates, the numbers that are in Arabic ciphers different from the text, so you spot them immediately in the list about the years that I studied. This is about Western Europe and Middle Ages, fundamentally. Well, I realized that the touching certain topics that were also very close to mine, because it turns out that even speaking about battles, we ended up independently to thematize the work in a bit in the same ways. Talking about the order of formation, the river crossings, the assaults. I mean, things that actually were reason that surprised me. It was even moving in a sense that there was so much vicinity. But the point there is, of course, I realized that everything he was referencing, it was either a direct information, like that is, directly from a source that can be a chronicle that states a certain thing. That may also, and I found certain topics that were fundamentally, and I'll explain you why, that I had even quoted myself back then, but I had expanded dramatically on because of the surroundings, and that's where the general, that is also part of the specialist task is, right, at the end of the day. But also, a lot of these references were to other studies, which is fine, including his own studies, that I had to study myself, because the scientific ones were pretty damn good, and a point of reference. And I realized that basically he, of course, repeated himself a little bit. Of course, he threw there things I already knew, and that's what I would say. I would do as well. And however, kept not, let's say, making a synthesis of this broader information he found altogether, right? That is, I wrote my work for the scientific purpose of coming up with a new idea. That is not just putting, let's say, some scholarly idea together simply by reference and saying, okay, well, now we phrased this, the order of this information differently, we put them together, but properly to come up with an opinion, even with a judgment, with an assessment, with also an actual measurement. Certain attitudes is like the ones we can't know when a battle began or ended, is like, let's throw it into chaos. So we because that's how the undertone sounded like, that is, history is so complex, sometimes we have to surrender to the fact we can't understand it. Well, thanks my eyes, but the reason why we make history is exactly the opposite, right? That is to say, especially in warfare, there is a bit this I found it even in another work of another scholar that frankly is also associated once again to my research now, randomly, but I mean closely, telling the truth, and I knew it from some certain month now, and I hope to meet him because he's actually a very cool guy. He also makes a lot of disclosing, and I remembered in analyzing a battle that I wrote, that I think I even added something new, even after hundreds of years of historiography that didn't actually consider all the sources for real. It was even a relatively important battle we have to discuss at some point in Schwerpunkt. He said, I took a chance to quote a source that said that in this battle there was a lot of dust and a lot of mess, the arrow bolts in the air like a whirlwind and so on, for saying like nobody understood anything of what was going on. The question is, are we sure of that? Like, this actually should open an enormous digression that I should make an entire video about, because it's brutally fascinating. That concerns, at the end of the day, the fog of war. And that is the idea that, of course, what happens in a battle is pretty messed up. At the point, we may not understand how things actually went for real. Here, for a 13th century battle, I can't understand it at so many levels, because, of course, we have no idea what they could be practically, right? We know how they worked, and that's how I basically developed my thesis on, that is properly in the theory or toward the actual how they made it work on the field, right, as armies, and how it could be. But of course there are certain things we cannot know, but also things we cannot know are often understandable through an overall pattern. That is, if I study 10 battles, and that's the generalistic idea, right? Instead of focusing just on one, I make, as I did in my work, like a list of at least, tens of battles plus other countless clashes, and you spot from sources that weren't trying to they weren't trying to rationalize the thing, weren't trying to make the theory of it. So it's something conceived unscientifically in a sense for our modern standards, and you find a pattern that recurs over and over and over and over and over and over again, basically for every battle, and also the battles that do not feature that because sources do not say it actually are kind of congruent with that. They could integrate the thing. You start saying, you know what? These things would have been a mess because war is hell in a way, and even scenographic, sensorially speaking. But still, here we understand basically that those who wrote, even if they weren't trying to make to reason like us about it, basically knew, and exactly because of that, they already knew how the thing was really gone. Like, if you had posed them questions, they probably would have been able to answer more concretely along our patterns. And because this same this what emerges from these battles is understandable in a sense, right? So simply say, it's too difficult to understand, it's anti-scientific as an idea. It's mostly what, in fact, people who tend not to have competence and expertise throw around, because they start saying, oh, well, you may never know, it's so uncertain, right? That sounds, always remember it just by, as an advice, as a heartly advice, that is something that people who do not know the answer, which is true, right? And honest and sincere, right? It's better for that person to say, I don't know, or we don't know, to make it less personal, let's say, but rather than someone who gives you an answer that properly is not certain about, right? That's also why we make history, we make hypotheses, theories, and so on, because we know that we don't know. And this is valid for every kind of scientific field, right? We factually do not know anything. It's not that, the fact we know how physics works, it's actually what happened. I mean, we don't even know what reality is. Let's be honest about this. So of course we always work in a bit of an empirical, theoretical way, which is what the sap of science is based on, and on this eternal debate, if you want. So the point I was making before is that when you repeat yourself in a style, you reference to yourself, it's fine as well. Usually, I don't know how. Of course it can be done, but you shouldn't maybe exceed too much. And it was fine anyway. I didn't care about that. I think I would do the same. But when something is really worth being mentioned, but at the same time, there is a bit of this as a disclosuring book was fine because it had to be more concise. Right? But there were also some jumps that I didn't like. For example, he quoted himself at some point in to an article that was one of the scientific ones that I loved, and that is the best ever written about a certain set of combined armed tactics, about a very specific area and time in medieval warfare, that I came to write on extensively in my thesis. This article was my first. It's the milestone. It's the unique point of reference. It's the most advanced thing. It debunks a lot of previous historiographical misconceptions. It references a lot of stuff. However, going back on it, I even found some mistakes myself. For example, misquote. Proving that a type of lance wasn't as long, because here there are also different terminologies used, and we don't know whether they fit or not, and that is a big deal, because when in a chronicle of battle you find a certain term that we know references to a spear, but we don't know how long that is, and you refuse the equivalence of those terms, and you don't properly source why that is the case, because I checked today. Even had my university send me the medieval vocabulary that he quoted for denying that equivalence, that in my opinion instead was concrete, because I found exactly one source from that time that stated that they were the same thing, and that doesn't mean it may be universal, maybe just that source, right? So that's how you should always reason in a sense. I say, why making it more difficult when at the end of the day we know that the functions could have been, even if the units of this pyramid might have been the same, well, this is a completely different thing. But I found in the disclosure work also reference to another of his scientific works that was talking about that same battle I was saying before, actually, where people like Delbrück, so we're talking about German historiography, the late 19th, beginning of the 20th century, had basically interpreted a passage of a chronicler that is the only actual reference to the problem, to the matter, that the baggage of supplies of the army had been aligned at the back of this army before the battle to retain the larger unit, the larger line that was fighting in there. So this historiography invented that was a sort of line of defense, an entrenchment. I mean, something that had a specifically, an active tactical purpose. That is not just to say what I presume, and also the other scholar presumes, in fact, by stating in that work that there's no proof of this, that these supplies were deployed in the back of the army, probably to simply discourage them from fleeing during the battle, because of course they would create an impediment. And we find different, we know this thing happened in Europe in different ways, so it's plausible, but it has nothing to do with entrenchment or line of defense. That historiography went as far as saying that during the battle the enemies broke through the lines and the infantry saved. It was something that is completely, by defending that line, the battle, there is no evidence of any sort, because the sources are just like a bunch, and they, you don't have to reference in a way. So we know they made a hypothesis on nothing, and they decided to interpret the battle in that way. What happens, surprise, surprise, though, is that in this disclosure book, the guy comes up with the same topic, and he says something that sounds like this. It seems that in that battle, the supply line, the wagons, the stuff, were used to create a line of defense. The question is, wait a second, what? You're the same one who has written actually a beautiful piece of literature, some tens of pages, by describing all the problem, also making comparison with the rest of European warfare, starting from that battle for debunking that perspective. Then in this disclosure book you say, as you never actually do also habitually in when you explain things, that it seems so that at least according to these people that those wagons were used that way. So stressing the fact that you're not certain yourself and that we are not certain in the first place. And in a disclosure book, and the question is why? Right? Because by, my pride would be at that point, and it was actually by quoting this stuff in my thesis, is that theory is completely devoid of any evidence. And that's cool for a historian to come up with that, right? It's like Occam's razor. The less the better. There is no need to invent things that are not there, and that we, in an exercise that is already based on not complicated and trying to get to see things instead more clearly for the ones that we're informed about. That is already a big deal that we have for the 13th to 14th century. So yeah, these are the kind of attitudes that stem from from a specialist. Here, it doesn't even have to do with the concept of hyper specialization, because this guy was also prolific enough to write about different things. But even about, I don't know, I can make another example that I indulge myself in as well. There is another battle that he had unavoidably to cover at some point, from the end of the 13th century, where, to make long story short, the two armies were confronting from the two sides, the two banks of a river that it could cross. I mean, it wasn't deep or anything, it could be. But, it constituted an important line of defense. The cavalry of one of the two armies left the infantry alone, came back home, because they were jealous of the infantry for political reasons at that point, and this infantry was assaulted by the other army crossing the river. And this infantry actually fought back pretty harshly, so much that actually even before it being attacked, the enemy had to use ballistas to knock them out, to soften up their ranks. Well, this guy, without any reasonable evidence, states that this infantry, I mean, actually with reasonable, the idea was reasonable in itself, and I actually agree with him, but there is really no evidence of sort that this infantry was equipped with a particular type of spear. Now, that would justify such harsh resistance, and the combination with crossbow and so on. So, the point was cool, because for my thesis, the fact that a scholar like him hypothesized, however, without any evidence, any actual factual explicit evidence that those troops were equipped like that, connected the resistance of that infantry, that is not also random infantry, because it came from a specific polity that they spotted to have been one of the most resistant in the period of my thesis, and that surely there is a connection in there for infantry, for foot combat, and so on, says that this is due to that particular type of armament, right? And I quote in my thesis, I had talked about that battle, and I said, look, this guy says that such a hard infantry resistance was probably caused by the fact that these guys were equipped with that type of spear, which I believe was true, because at the time it was an extremely it was a very widespread weapon, at least, and it was connected exactly to that tactical role function and so on. So why not, right? The same polity issued that, and there is extensive evidence, but we just don't know about that battle. You understand that this is also a bit of a method video, because it gives you the scale of the scruples that sometimes are very low, because at the end of the day, who cares? But when you write a scientific work, you have to be extremely careful about it, especially if somebody has already said something about that. I corrected the same guy, for example, on another battle from a scientific work that was written extremely well, but he didn't probably go deep at the fullest of it. Basically, he said that an army was arrayed in a certain way there was no evidence for. Instead, by confronting lots of battle arrays, patterns, I came to the conclusion that the most likely thing was a type of array that it's not that he thought was unlikely, so there wasn't any direct, but he simply, invented that could be in a way that didn't find a justification, even quoting another battle that I quoted, where there was actually a type of evidence that served actually to say the contrary of what he said. So that's how easy you get tricked. Why? When you have not specialized in that thing, when you haven't studied enough that field, and you haven't tried to make it a bit of a more organic, more theoretical, more kind of, you didn't come up with, what the purpose of scientific work is, to come up with some kind of evidence, right? That it has to be well substantiated, well sourced, well developed, something new that can make a difference compared to what we had come up before, right? So it's obvious that even taking tiny bits of a certain topic, like an hyper specialist can do, this is not specifically the maybe for this battle, maybe it could be the case, because the guy maybe reconstructed that battle or attempted, because the information is extremely scarce, by the way. It's almost frustrating, but you can't. He was clever. He could come up with that in that regard. Personally, if he hadn't written that work, I would have not even known about the battle, or at least I would have not inserted it in my work either, because I had read the sources, but I hadn't been particularly, I hadn't had the genius to come up with or better, listen, other mistake. I had read about this battle from a work of a guy who hadn't quoted the proper sources, but this guy's study. So I said, okay, and that's how I came to read that study, though, and I realized that, and I came to read the sources, and I came up with myself with that theory. So you understand the chain here, that if you make a mistake, another person can make a mistake. When I sourced, for example, him, when talking, I referenced him when I addressed that infantry had the kind of spear, somebody will come next to me and said, those two guys said that, and two guys is more than one, and that one at the beginning is also kind of an important name. Who knows where I will become that too? I don't know. But the question is, because at the end of the day, that's the criterion: how frequently you're sourced. What's the most reliable scientific work? The one that is mostly sourced, mostly referenced to. Excuse me. That is, the more you're quoted, the more you are seen, de facto, as an authority. Maybe it's wrong. Maybe they're all wrong. Like those who comment commonly on the pattern of the Carthaginians with the Sarissa, right? Or the Saracens, say better. But it's not a necessarily, as you understand, an easy thing. And these are actually the steps that occur when. And the reason being, for this lack of broad understanding, in that case of that battle, the guy had studied just that battle and hadn't spent, like I've done, 3 years of my life studying exclusively battles. And it was, I don't feel like I've done that much, but I've done what was enough, at least to see things in a different way than another would do. But evidencing it, not guessing it, which is what history should be and science should be about. So that is an example of how hyperspecialization can trick you, aside from all the various criticism that can make to a kind of a faceless scholarship that can ramble over and over again in my videos, right? This gives you an example of actually a person I estimate, but that could have framed things better had he had a bit of a broader, or if you want, it was both broader but also more specific knowledge. So at the end of the day, it's always about both, right? What could I add about the kind of specialization? It's difficult because, of course, one con is, as I was saying before, that also the time you spend researching about a certain topic is in depth is all time taken away from having a more general view. Why? Because proportionally, to study in detail something smaller, you take away resources from knowing at a general level potentially something much that covers much more, right? At least extension. Of course, you know less, right? It's less intensive, but it's more extensive, and that's why the two paths are so different, because it's not just it's not about it's a monofactual difference. It really strikes deep at your understanding and your own knowledge, right? You can be very, very intelligent, but not having many terms of comparison sometimes to frame information within your intellective skills. That's why we should always, I presume, being wary of any information we're provided with. Do not think that you get that book and you will find the expertise, the great capacity to understand. You will be hopefully very well informed, yes, but not at the point of knowing how that information came most of the times, for which you have to become an expert yourself. Also, I would say, sometimes you ask me, I was talking about this in the last video about books, read the thing, but where to get generic information, right? Sometimes you want books for information you can, as I told last time, you can literally find reliably on Wikipedia, and I'm not kidding, right? Why does that happen? Because there is an evident prejudice and actual misunderstanding between of what scholarly authority factually is, right? Let's say academic work today tends also to be by default specialistically cut, right? It's very rare to find a work that tells the ABC unless it's a manual. But even manuals today have become kind of discursive. They're not like, in that year happened this, to give you a dimension. Because believe me, also having a general view, and this is where we get the advantages of that, is, and it's always about both being focused enough on that topic, so fixing your attention on that, but at the same time having also broader scope, is exactly to be capable of drawing that overall picture that can derive. Sometimes it doesn't even take much, like especially for times and places where there is relatively few as an information. You don't have to struggle much to understand how certain things went. Like ever since I started Schwerpunkt, for example, I acknowledged that it's much easier than it seems to get that general but spot on understanding once you have a bit of healthy historical parameters in your mind, and you try to reduce to flatten too much to know how, let's say, what more or less politics and society work. If you think that history at that point is the history of the leader, of the people, so this heroistic attitude of times, also nationalistically based, you can't go very far, especially because, of course, nationalistic takes are not just wrong, but they're properly anachronistic. That is, you can't make a nationalistic point about a 6th century reality, because nation state that created that pattern of interpretation was completely remote from those guys' understandings that didn't absolutely reason like that by standard. But lots of people also that tend to to look at generalistic understanding come from that background, because they need it. That's the only pattern they maybe have of understanding history, because it's the only thing they've ever been used or felt the need to think history like. So you would say, but also, what do I have to do precisely to become a bit more of a specialist? Well, I don't know, because I've done this, I've come to some level of expertise in certain topics because I properly wrote hefty thesis about them. The shortest one was 160 pages. The other one was 260, if I'm not wrong. This one is 610 at this point, or more actually, which also depends how we frame it. This would be 1200 pages if you frame it like the other two. So you understand that took a lot of time. Like it took like 3 months, but I think like 6 months the second, and this one took I would say 3 years altogether. I mean, considering time loss, it also happens. So you understand that is a consistent commitment, and most people can't. They simply maybe afford it, but in other fields, they don't have time to do it for history. And because of course I work with that, so it's easy. It's easy for me. Honestly, I wouldn't know how to tell you that. It could be, I don't know. I know people who, in fact, I do know people who are very expert, for example, about military history, way more than me, who those limits you can easily test on these grounds when you realize they haven't made your same path. It's kind of reassuring in a sense, because that shows you also that helps you to dimension, to not to be an iconoclast, to say, so that's all what that guys know at the end of the day. No, because you may always be. I never tend, even if I kind of have this bit of contemporary attitude, never underestimate a person's intelligence or knowledge, especially. Right? I don't. I try not to do it, because it's much easier to see that, to eventually to be prepared yourself at some point, not to have much of a conflictual, competitive behavior. But when you study history, you tend to be struggle for that authoritativeness in a sense. At least you want people to appreciate what you wrote, so you must be scientific, as we were saying before. You can't be quote unprepared, and therefore you always have to be very alert. And yeah, it is a bit a matter of composition, as you understand. For that guy also discussed before, I admire him, but in some ways, of course, I think I have gone beyond, and it's normal because we all go beyond compared to other people, even if it's just for a small thing, right? But it's still different from that. We all this is how I like to see things, that in this world, every person knows something that nobody knows. And that should humble you a bit, because it makes you understand also how history there is not you, the scientist, looking at these idiots in the past and trying to speak for them. No. It's them who teach you things that you wouldn't even imagine until you don't listen to what they're telling you. That's why looking at sources is a life-changing experience in so many ways, because it's real, right? Whether it doesn't matter whether it's true or not. The important is that it's real. That in a way or another, somebody wrote that stuff, said that stuff, did that stuff, and you can reconstruct that. And you're not talking about a fictional reality, but about actual history. That's a reason, for example, I never, but not even remotely, liked any kind of fantasy in my life. At least in the, I don't know, postmodern sense of it. Of course, fiction is cool, so it can even be a fantasy world. But if you ask me, never been a fan, absolutely, of. Now I can't say of what, but I figured, also many people who were interested in medieval history come from that background. I'm completely the opposite of that. I've never liked it. I like reality. I've always liked reality because it's far more useful. And especially way more interesting than anything can be, fictionally put together. In at least considering that such things and more happen in reality for real. So I could say, to answer the question how to be a bit a specialist if you lack, maybe if you secondary education in that specific field, having naturally a secondary education in another field helps you to frame in different, even if with different tools, but with certain levels of, refinement, certain ideas. But I presume there can be a good, a good way of making it in a way or another. Of course, reading, as we were saying last time, you should, yes, look at bibliographies and notes, which usually from a general approach doesn't happen very often, because you just want the knowledge, the molten information, molten gold, being told from studies, right? And until you don't make history yourself, you don't see the importance of notes and bibliography, at least as much. But that is a key. That is, once again, it's also, as we were saying last video, it's a matter of commitment, right? What are you doing that for? Like, where are you going with this? If it's just getting a bit of information, you will probably just read a couple of books and it ends there. But you must be very committed to go search for further information. That means you're willing, if you're reading the notes and the bibliography, that you want to read other stuff, and you will read other stuff, hopefully, right? Or at least you understand how that works. So having a discipline and a pressure is much more difficult than it seems, and that's really what makes the difference. It's not that people are stupid that can't learn this stuff if they don't go to university, but quite rarely the motivation is not going to be enough, right? And this is valid also for things that objectively you don't want to learn. This is an aspect that maybe I got vaccinated against, in the sense that university, for example, it was terribly boring. I mean, I've learned a lot of interesting things indeed, but the overall exam mechanism was boring, was annoying, was tiring in a way, and I learned a lot of stuff. Spent an astonishing amount of time learning things that autonomously I would have never liked to learn, right? I could customize something, but other stuff I was forced to learn. And I must tell that a bit like in school, where I was at least more interested, maybe because I knew it was mandatory in a sense, so I had to make the best of it, but couldn't change it. Um, but I would say that that imposed information at the end of the day was more useful than it seems, because it's aimed at giving you a structure. Then eventually you will have to fill with your own material that you will create. And this is very important, of course, especially in humanistic, in history, right? Because there is simply so much to know that, of course, you are the ones you are expected to learn for a lifetime, not just to stop where you get a bachelor degree and pretend to be a historian. It doesn't work like that. And so the structure is fundamental in a sense. And I must say that indeed, however, some of the single most fascinating things I've learned in those in that environment were random, right? It could be 10 lessons, 9 could be extremely boring and useless, very mildly thought-provoking. One could change your mindset, okay? And that is, in fact, a chance, an odd I'm willing to undertake, because the potential your mind has to expand in that way is enormous, is infinite, right? And you should be exposed to a lot of this information, but at the same time not being too superficial. That is, it's not about quantity but about quality, indeed, right? But the truth is that perhaps we just need both, and that's why I think personally the best way of learning at any level is a ton of theory and a ton of practice at the same time. If you take away one of the two just by quantity or of type, you're done for. You won't learn well. You always feel that information is incomplete. So of course, if you want to be a specialist, you should be willing to cover all the bibliography existing on a certain topic that today especially has become very difficult to do, right? Either it's a very niche topic which could be profitably expanded, at least if there is enough evidence. In today's research, there is a lot of emphasis towards the unknown, to the virgin, unexplored topics that especially like maybe, I don't know, I know some anthropologists that have this kind of explorers spirit that would bring them around the world, knowing that the things you wouldn't even know they existed, right? If you are a bit more traditionalist, medievalist like me, you would of course have to enter this beautiful, astonishing world of an extremely, however, structured and complex amount of historiography that you can't dominate unless that commitment I was talking about before, for that is, if it's valid, it's on average it's difficult even to find a person who would read 3 or 4 books about a certain topic. You can imagine covering hundreds of volumes. My research at this point is, I don't think even it's dramatically oversourced, but it's like 600 works, and I had to read them all. It wasn't, you understand why I say it takes time to do certain stuff, but that's exactly what you need to do at some point, because otherwise you can't reach as far as others have done, which makes history indeed more difficult, more demanding, but at the same time more provoking. That is, are you willing to do that? Our professors back in the day would have to read much less. They would have to read 3 or 4 books and exhaust the topic. Today it's impossible. Today you could make an entire research just researching the bibliography. Some people do that, as a matter of fact, making historiographical research to change a bit, study the perspectives and so on. That's also fascinating, objectively. So yeah, it goes like that. Searching, monographies, articles. Never underestimate articles. Most of them today are rubbish, but still some are pretty good. They complete. You're always looking at references. Look at references, because references recur. So you will, the more you read and the more you stay focused on that, you will be able to dimension what has been written, right? Of course, things update very easily, It's very easy. You know that if you started 3 years research, surely by at the end of those years, you somebody will have written something more you didn't know at the beginning. Could be very actually close to your own topic. Um, there is there is a consistent risk that this also goes along with what your motivation is, as we've seen, but how you can practically make that work. If you're not researching, you just want to reach your own amateur level of specialism, let's say, in this oxymoric way, you definitely have different motivations, different methods, and so on. But I can tell you, I've met a lot of these people. I mean, a lot of them. People who read actually way more than I did, that, however, made other jobs. And I realized that they could be very skilled, very precise about a certain topic, but you can't perceive the limit. You can't perceive up to which point mentally they have reached. Because when you have been somewhere, right, in the level of depth of criticism, etc., you can't come back. Yeah, your mind structures itself in that way as reaching that depth, and therefore you may even have acquired less information, but the quality of, especially the one you can, the capacity of framing it and contextualizing it dramatically explodes. So I remember when I was younger, I did something I forced myself to learn. Yes, I was probably one of the few people that after school, certain time, I did it for linguistical reasons, telling the truth. So in there, you know that exercise and practice is very, very important. But I forced myself into it. I guess I could do it historically speaking as well. And partially I do, because aside from this work, I still read a lot. Think about Schwerpunkt. I learned a lot, right? Before, I would read books normally about different topics, right, all the time. So that is instead probably the best to have a generalistic approach. That is, maybe it's different if you want to cover really an extensional level of information. That is, you want to know more or less world history, right? You can. There are of course specific reads for it. That's a discipline, for example, that the subject in history is acquiring certain importance, as far as I know, especially in Anglo-Saxon countries. The idea of making literally history of the world. Of course, you understand the extreme or horrific approximations that such a level of scale, of synthesis should bring you to make. So it's obvious that is dangerous, because it also uses you to too simplistic ideas. That is a bit the inherent risk of any generalist position. You're willing to run it if from there you kind of descend into the depths of history. At a global level, I would say it's almost useless. I personally never studied global history as such. I just tried to make a collection of different areas of the world over time, knowing for some more, other less. But global history, well, unless we're talking about prehistorical stuff, when we mostly look at human migration, this thing, maybe that's useful, even in prehistorical times. But when it gets to already, civilization, I think it's worth studying it from, a decent level of depth already. Naturally, for any journalistic approach, manuals are great, right? But those also fuel a bit the illusion of knowing enough just by synthesis. Manuals tend to make lots of mistakes too, and of course, as we've seen, the greater the level of approximation, the larger the scale, the absolute scale of mistake, of misunderstanding. So in my opinion, a generalistic approach should always also take into consideration a preferential field of interest. And that is how I presume already starts. I started reading military history, never had a omniscient kind of ambition in my life. Not even, in the time of structuring my knowledge in a equilibrated way in every subject. I wish I had done it. I love, philosophy, history of religions, languages as well, this stuff, but history of art, yeah, I do like them. Literature in general, I like all this stuff, but I don't have time. I've always liked military history. I even made a video recently about that, and yeah, I just do this now. So it can be, yeah, it's somewhat frustrating, especially the older you get, I must tell you. But still, you see, Schwerpunkt is a good example because before it, I always say it, I didn't know how much I could learn. What I had, for example, to do in order to explain these topics I discuss is of terrific impact on my own mind. Because before you're kind of lazy, you say, well, okay, yeah, I could do that, I can read a little bit, you know what, but you don't understand the effort that a pressure makes you do, right? It's something very different. And also this stuff of randomly picking topics that I started here is, of course, within a pool, within a range of that I selected in a sense, but still broad enough. I mean, we go from Hellenistic to Napoleonic times. It's not a few, but concentrating in the Middle Age is still pretty large pool. And feeling the need of explaining yourself adequately. Before I didn't speak like this, even if it sucks today, you know, and even my English was consistently worse than now. Well, that helped me a lot, but especially it taught me at that point it forced me to make comparisons, to dimension things. So if you stick to just one topic, you will never acquire that. Like, you have to force yourself into picking the next exotic topic and trying to understand, and trying to provide an. At the beginning, it's embarrassing because you say, well, but I literally know nothing about that. Well, yes, like pretty much anything that you didn't know before, now you do. So it works really like that, and that's how you improve. But you must at least start, because otherwise you can't see, and you will amaze yourself if you do that, right? So I would say that's a bit the best, forcing yourself in reading even things you wouldn't expect to like. Maybe I've always liked that. I've always had, as I told you, this almost, I had a bit of an encyclopedical tendency in my past. I would say I liked external language. Now I want to read a lot of stuff, a lot and good stuff, and about all that topic and becoming it. Yeah, but when you had the schedule, say of 10 books, it always used to occur to me, that may be actually pretty natural, that after the third book, like the fourth one, had to be something else from this topic, and always read about different stuff. I don't know whether it's because of, I don't think I've ever been particularly curious, right? I've been always fascinated with the evidence. Everything came to, I came to cover with my mind, but still, there is a certain point I need to vary a little bit, and that's what increased also the range of topics we discuss here, that at this point now are wide enough. There is probably curiosity is a component, right? Let's even see what comes out as the next topic, right? I would say, speaking of motivation, given that is always the most important thing, another crucial passage that is valid both for specialists and generalists is confronting with others, right? At least letting yourself exposed to criticism, to engage in debate, to develop a dialectic, a logic, a rhetoric. That is very important for anyone. You have to make sense. You have to say things that stand on their feet, all by themselves. You have to be credible. You have to provide some kind of evidence, of course, but also with the proving that you're capable of understanding it. Sometimes it's very easy, because given the average historical interest or understanding, it's pretty easy to know something more than the average, right? That is even truer military history, I must tell you. And of course, speaking of authority, a lot of that revolves around tricking others in thinking that you are intelligent, right? And that is maybe being intelligent at the end of the day, because you don't have really to trick them. It's just having doing the thing, but realizing that for you having arrived there is still a lot of people who haven't, and therefore believe that who knows which magic stands behind. and you still have done something at the end of the day, but you know you're not a genius. You're not a this dramatically competent person. We all make mistakes. Also, there is way and ways, way and way to make mistakes. I mean, to claim certain authority, to be, as I told you, for example, I've always like to do things on my own. There are people who leave, in my opinion, a bit too attached to scholarship, to the idea that there is a name, that there is that guy who wrote that, we have to follow, we have to revere him because he wrote it. Why? I revered in, I like the information, if it's good or not, and then I can appreciate the person, yes, but I don't think that any kind of information, as I was saying before, comes from something that is not worth criticizing. For yourself, it doesn't have to be necessarily, you have to do it pro or against it, and that's exactly the point. You have to stay open and free and having a valid reason for wanting to learn. And naturally, motivations are different for many person, but I would say that if you are able to detach your own subjectivity, your own feelings, let's say, you have to learn how to be sincere with yourself, how to be honest with yourself, first of all. I think in history is very, very important. Military history forces you a bit to do so, because it reveals you things of such a magnitude and just certain examples, and that you say, wow, but if those guys were able to do certain things and I didn't even know where to start from, maybe I should be more humble, right? So this opens to all another set of considerations, but I won't make them today. I would just say that never think you are more intelligent than other people. Never do. I personally never made that. I never felt the need to make that mistake. I mean, sometimes I even say that. I test. I mean, constantly when I meet someone, I need to think like, what's this mind about, right? It's not even a matter of intelligence. I mean, I'm talking about intelligence as a structured mental. I mean, knowledge-wise, that's what I'm interested in, of course. So. Because I also want to learn myself, so it's always positive to accompany yourself with people that are more intelligent than you, right? You will maybe be a burden for them, but you will surely learn a lot of stuff in the process. But properly never think there is a point where you arrive that is satisfactory with learning. I personally can't conceive myself like that. I can't, of course, be satisfied of certain achievements, but and that they give me confidence objectively. Yes, knowing history is also a way to structure my own, my own stability, my own reliability on myself, in a sense, because I know what I'm talking about at some level. But that's exactly the point. It's very difficult to properly say to know that you know something without quoting Socrates, but that's the sap of how to go beyond, to be a better person. I wouldn't say a more intelligent. It's not that easy, right? You can also be very intelligent but not being wise at all, and that is a problem in life. I experienced that. For example, I don't think I'm particularly wise after all, right? And even knowing things, it depends. I mean, there's not a single type of intelligence. There are different types and also different fields that, every intelligence is different in nature, we could say. So it's easy to misunderstand people too. It's easy to, that is a huge mistake. I think at some point I will dedicate a video to that, but as I was saying before, talking about the comments and time received, is that the level of misunderstanding between people is astonishing. It's one of the first things that impressed me and brought me to discuss history on the internet at the same time, because I presume that at least, perhaps my greatest capacity, because for the rest I'm very mediocre, believe me, very average, is objectivity. I try to be objective, right, as much as I can. I can't sit and learn about stuff without first wondering whether what I learn is, what I'm learning is exactly what needs to be known, and that's what pushes me to research, right? of course, that is also very important. But for many people, there is no game. Like, they have their own agenda. They are biased as hell. They had the only point they want to do is, to say that the person is right or wrong because they feel, they believe, they have that prearranged reality. That's naturally a very mature way of being. But sometimes the misunderstanding is properly cognitive. That you often don't understand, that you often realize that kind of bias is not just like they know they're wrong. Maybe they can't feel there is something that doesn't work, but they don't want to acknowledge because they don't know what's the point, and therefore they legitimately think sometimes they are, right along that pattern. That is difficult to. I wouldn't like to be misunderstood, honestly. I wouldn't like, nobody does, but it's unavoidable. When I was starting to approach the 1000th video, think of all the stuff I've said here and how much this has been understood. Sometimes I would say even knowledge proper as the type of information you provide, I would say can come maybe in a unreliable form, but in order to make a point, maybe it can serve something, right? I can't say it's the best thing to do, but sometimes expressing a concept through maybe not a lie, but let's say an idea that of something that however really exists though, and that however you phrase in ways that people may not are not necessarily gonna check is important, because there is a hierarchy there of even properly of the quality of the concepts you come up with, that is not just about the information. I'd say probably I've just said probably something astonishing to you now. I hope you won't become paranoid about that, because I usually don't do it. I can tell you what I say here is, like, I can make mistakes, surely I make them, but the points I make are founded on something. They don't like, it's not that I invent them there just for the sake of it, which is hard to do, I must tell you, but it has a point, it does work, and once again, it's always through work that you can improve, right? There is nothing to do about it. It's always like that. The more you do, the more you work, the better you can perfect yourself. The commitment, the pressure you put in yourself, that is the key to make it better qualitatively. And that nobody can teach but yourself through life experience, right? I would say, as you understand, these topics are endlessly connected to others. So I stop it here. I came into my mind that video I made recently about believing in yourself. Yes, because I'm clicking now, checking things that I can't properly discuss. But that make me wonder, what's tomorrow about, right? And Adam, at so many levels, and I would say this is what history really teaches you to be safer, right? To be safer literally, because you know how to cope with problems out there, and to make you avoid making mistakes more than right. And this exercise is fundamental, really. But anyhow, for now I just stop it here. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, please share it. Otherwise, leave a like or subscribe to my channel if you're interested in my upcoming content. And for now, I thank you heartily for listening to me. I wish you a nice time and see you next time. Bye.